What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Moving with Life. This is episode 123. We're going to jump into the reading here shortly, but hopefully you've been able to get something out of the content we've gone over, especially last episode was detachment, especially because I wanted to tie in Marcus Aurelius and Stoics, or at least that's what led me to wanting to jump into that. I know I mentioned it, but just to kind of recap, and then we can get into the next the next section of leadership strategy and tactics. I don't know how. As I was reading it, I'm like, man, there's so much. Again, this is my issue. I don't know if it's good or bad, but just so many details I feel are relevant or I feel are necessary. And the fact is that trying to maximize the time for this podcast, it's like, well, I actually can't say every detail or give every single piece of context, but if I can get the right details and have that order, then I can hopefully bring you something that you can use, something that'll maybe, I thought about that, but I never knew how to word it, or maybe you didn't even know that you didn't know what you know, right? And we're gonna continue into leadership. This chapter I really like because I feel it's also very relevant. And one of the points that I didn't say last week or last episode, but I want to mention right now. And as we go through, I think it'll make more sense. But when you have that bad leader, bad mentor, not bad mentor. Sorry, you shouldn't have bad mentor. Bad leader or bad management. Sometimes, and this is the empathy, because you have to find a balance. Yeah, empathy it took me a long time to kind of grasp my dive into empathy, and I try to be empathetic as much as possible, because I'm not you, you're not me. When I have a manager or a boss or whatever, a person in a leadership position, I'm not them, and I'm not always in their I'm not in their shoes ever. So I don't know where they're coming from all the time. Maybe we have similar experiences. Them being in a leadership position, I expect them to have more knowledge than I am, and I've been very lucky to have that. But even with that, sometimes having more knowledge isn't always good. In the sense of you think you know everything, and then now you don't. Now everything's just about you. So I'm gonna jump into this before I go on too much longer. I think it'll make sense as I go through this, and then as I'm reading, and if I come up to a thought, then I'll bring it up, and then we'll maneuver through it, and then we'll go piece by piece. So this section is so it's literally the next one. So it's a second platoon titled Arrogance and Humility. Once you finish your first deployment as a new guy, you aren't a new guy anymore. As you are assigned to your second platoon, you graduate from new guy to a one crew's wonder, which means you might not be a new guy anymore, but you still don't know everything, although you think you might. So then it goes into, he starts talking about who his leadership is in this platoon. So the platoon leadership was very strong, all except for the actual platoon commander itself. He had done a lateral transfer from another occupational specialty in the Navy to become a SEAL. This means that even though he was a senior lieutenant, he was very inexperienced in the SEAL teams. He had not done a SEAL team workup or deployment yet. He did not have the experience a platoon commander would normally have, and yet he was in charge of the platoon. That alone is not a big deal. The military is set up to work that way. An inexperienced officer surrounded by solid senior enlisted personnel who give the officer tactical guidance and keep things running smoothly. At least that is the way it's supposed to work. But in this platoon, it wasn't working that way at all. In this particular case, the platoon commander did not want to listen to advice from his senior enlisted leadership or from any of us. Even though he was the least experienced individual in the platoon besides the new guys, he wanted to make all the decisions. All the plans were his plans. All the decisions were his decisions. He didn't want to listen to anyone. Needless to say, this did not go over very well. Not only did it rub the senior enlisted leadership the wrong way, when the rest of us troops saw that he did not take input from senior enlisted leadership, it made us nervous. If he wasn't listening to the advice being offered from the most experienced guys in the platoon, we were worried his plans might be suspect. We were right. The plans the platoon commander created and imposed on us were not good, and it showed. We had some issues out in the field. We didn't accomplish our training missions at the level we should have, but our subpar performance did not change the attitude of the platoon commander. We failed a training mission. When we failed a training mission, he blamed others. He would never recognize or admit that perhaps his plan wasn't the best, or maybe the decisions he'd made in the field weren't good calls. Looking back, it is obvious that what this officer lacked in experience, he made up for with a massive ego. I didn't fully understand at this time. I just didn't have the experience to recognize what was going on, but it's clear now that he lacked any level of humility whatsoever. Let's see. So then he goes on to say that, his senior chief and LPO, leading petty officer, so LPO, they tried their best to counsel, cajole, influence, and mentor. They spent extra time explaining how things worked. They tried to get him to put his ego in check and let some of them make some of the tactical decisions. Unfortunately, they failed to change him. Months went by, and there was no improvement in the platoon commander's behavior. Finally, one late night before an arduous training mission out in the desert, our LPO, the second most senior enlisted man in the platoon, had enough. He disagreed with the platoon commander's plan, and he let him know it. The disagreement escalated into an argument, and then into a full-on yelling match. And finally, the platoon commander snapped and took a swing at the LPO. We all jumped in and separated the two, but it was a bad scene. Over the next few days, a dark mood fell over the platoon. We had realized we had a real problem. Our officer was arrogant and not listening to anyone. That was bad enough. But now he had tried to hit our LPO. This was unacceptable. We wouldn't stand for it. The grumblings about the situation turned into a roar, and our disorganized complaints became organized. We needed to make a stand. So then they start figuring things out, and it was starting to sound like a mutiny. And here it mentions a Uniform Code of Military Justice: a person who is found guilty of attempted mutiny, sedition, or failure to report a mutiny or sedition shall be punished by death. So jumping down, as we keep on. So a couple days later, we got back to the team from the desert training area. Our senior chief talked to the master chief of the command, the senior enlisted man at SEAL Team 1, and explained the situation. He got us a meeting with the commanding officer of SEAL Team 1. Our commanding officer was a highly respected leader. He was down to earth and charismatic, with a great reputation as a tactical operator, a rare reputation for a senior officer to have. When scheduled, the enlisted men of our platoon reported to the commanding officer's office. He called us in and asked us individually to explain the situation. One by one, we told him our versions of what we had seen that night, the night that the platoon commander tried to hit our LPO, and we detailed the general atmosphere of the platoon. I told him the platoon commander doesn't really listen to anyone. It's his way or the highway. Jumping down a little bit, the commanding he listens to him, and he listens intently. He says it here, listens intently. He let everybody talk, and then jumping down. Now I'm jumping down. The commanding officer had squashed our rebellion. He was right. Mutinies are not allowed in the Navy, and he wasn't going to have one at his SEAL team. But it turns out he also wasn't going to have a bad platoon commander. Over the next couple of days, the commanding officer consulted with the command master chief, talked more with our platoon senior chief, did a thorough assessment of the platoon commander's leadership shortfalls, and based on that assessment, called our platoon commander into the commanding officer's office and relieved him of his duties as platoon commander. It wasn't a mutiny from the troops. It was a decision by the commanding officer. The platoon commander was removed from his position and removed from SEAL Team 1. This alone might have been a good leadership lesson for me as a young SEAL. Arrogance and throwing rank around does not work, but I'm not sure if I would have really understood that lesson had it not been for what happened. So the platoon commander got fired. They got this new guy, and for the book and for privacy's sake, he's known as Delta Charlie. Delta Charlie had an incredible reputation as an officer and as an enlisted man. He had started his career as an enlisted man and risen through the ranks all the way to senior chief, the second from the top enlisted rank in the Navy, just beneath Master Chief. He earned his commission and became an officer. He took over a bunch of things, and as he started working his way through the officer ranks, he had combat experience. So then talk about one crew under. So then now starting again. So he also had a relaxed way about him. He seemed very calm, usually carrying a half smile on his face. When he spoke to us for the first time, he said, "I'm looking forward to working with all of you." That was the first indicator of what kind of leader Delta Charlie was going to be. It was subtle, but I noticed it. He didn't say, "I'm looking forward to leading you," or "I'm glad to be taking over this platoon," or "I run a tight ship," or even "I'm honored to be taking over as your commander." Instead, he said he was looking forward to working with all of us. His use of the word "with," standing in stark contrast to what we had been hearing from the old platoon commander, who always separated himself from us in his speech. But Delta Charlie was different. He indicated not that he was above us or separate from us, but that he was one of us. One of the biggest differences between Delta Charlie and his predecessor was that Delta Charlie had a massive amount of experience, while the former platoon commander had next to none, like the rest of the new guys. Delta Charlie had done everything. The former platoon commander had done nothing. Since Delta Charlie had so much experience, I expected him to tell us exactly how to do everything. After all, that is what the old platoon commander had done, despite his lack of experience and knowledge. The former platoon commander had always come up with his own plan, told us how he wanted us to execute it, and expected us to execute it based on those specific orders. So I found it quite shocking, as did the rest of the enlisted men in the platoon, that Delta Charlie didn't order us around at all. He didn't come up with his own plans for everything. He didn't tell us how he wanted us to do things. He executed classic decentralized command. He told us what he needed to get done, then told us to figure out how we wanted to do it. Example, said, hey, here's the mission for tonight. Figure out how you think we should do it, and let me know. Then Jocko goes on to say they were nervous but thrilled. They didn't want to let him down. He seemed like a tactical genius, but what I realized later was that he was detached from the planning process. We're talking about detachment. But what I realized later was that he was detached from the planning process, so he could see it from an altitude easily see where the holes were. This was the exact opposite thing from what would happen when our former platoon commander would come up with a plan on his own, then force it down upon us. When that happened, we were the ones seeing the holes in his plan, and we couldn't fathom how he could come up with such a horrible one. On top of that, when Delta Charlie would allow us to come up with a plan, we would have complete ownership of it. Of course, it was our plan. He didn't need to convince us to buy into it. We already bought into it. And when we would go out into the field and execute the plan, since it was our plan, we were completely committed to making it a success. That attitude was totally contrary to how we felt about the platoon commander's former platoon commander's plans. They were his plans, not ours, so we didn't have any ownership of them. It was a struggle for him to get us to buy into them. After all, we are humans with our own ideas, and because of our egos, we often think our ideas are the best. When he imposed a plan on us, we would automatically think of how much better our plan would be, and we kept that in the backs of our heads, especially when we went into the field. When we hit an obstacle, instead of trying to figure out a way to overcome it, we simply thought, the platoon commander didn't think of this, did he? His plan is awful. My plan would have been much better. There was one thing Delta Charlie did that made an impression on me. He took out the trash. This is no big deal, and I likely wouldn't have thought too much about it, except for the fact that I never saw a former platoon commander do it. You see, the platoon office, or as it is called in the SEAL teams, the platoon hut, needs to be cleaned every day. This assignment usually goes to the new guys. At the end of every day, the new guys sweep up, dust off, and take out the trash. Cleaning is a menial but necessary task. It keeps the new guys humble. As a one cruise wonder, I felt like I was way above cleaning up. I didn't need to do that anymore, and the higher up you went in the chain of command, it seemed to me, the more distance there was from menial, I thought it was menial. I'm thinking of maniacal. No, so menial task. Forget the other menial task of cleaning up. Unless you were Delta Charlie. At the end of each day, he would take out the trash, maybe run a broom through the space. It was no big deal. It took him less than 2 minutes to push the broom, then consolidate the trash from the 2 or 3 garbage cans in the platoon space, take them outside, and throw them into the dumpster. But those 2 minutes left a mark on me. This was a tangible and physical action that represented pure humility. Delta Charlie was the most senior man in the platoon. He also had the most experience. But there he was, taking out the garbage, and yet I was too good to do it. So then, let's see. I have my next bullet point, but I'm trying to see. We only had to see that a couple of times before the lower enlisted guys and I started preemptively taking out the trash and cleaning the space so that Delta Charlie didn't have to. We did it out of respect. Respect that Delta Charlie didn't demand but earned. I do have an opinion on that because I feel like even that's getting lost. I've experienced and seen where leaders do that, and where these next generation of workers aren't following suit, and that's really annoying. And I'm not saying I'm perfect because I'm not, but I feel like it's something. This is a podcast about points of views and trying to stay humble and keep myself in check as well. But it's something that I'm noticing, and because it's always like, oh, this group does this versus, let's say you have a good leader and they take out the trash. Let's just keep to this example of taking out the trash and following suit. I'm definitely seeing less and less of that from our next generation coming up as employees. Because that's what I am too. So it's not like I'm not trying to seclude myself from this thing. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, but it is annoying when you have someone who has your back and then you can't do simple things such as taking out trash or cleaning up, complaining about cleaning up the damn floor. The former platoon commander, on the other hand, had eschewed any kind of menial labor. It was below him. He was the almighty platoon commander, the officer in charge. He wasn't going to take out the garbage, and when he acted that way, well, we weren't going to take out the garbage either. None of the lower enlisted guys did anything to help him out. He was on his own. And while Delta Charlie was a phenomenal tactician, an incredible planner, and a gifted operator, it was his humility more than anything else that drove the platoon to want to do a good job for him. We didn't want to let him down. We didn't want to disappoint him in any way. And we certainly didn't want to make him look anything less than perfect to our commanding officer. So we worked hard. We worked as hard as we could in everything we did, everything. And everything we did, everything. And this dedication showed in the way the platoon performed. It was the best platoon I was ever a part of. That platoon changed the course of my life, and Delta Charlie had an immense impact on me. And then he goes on to say, because of Delta Charlie, that was why Jocko, that's why he considered going enlisted or going officer from enlisted. The core of what Delta Charlie taught me was the importance of humility. He had all that experience and all that knowledge and the rank of the position. He had every reason to elevate himself above us, every reason to look down on us, every reason to act as if he were better than every one of us. But he never looked down on us at all. The fact that he didn't is what made us respect him and truly want to follow him. I still try to follow his example to this day. And that's the end of 2nd Platoon, Arrogance versus Humility. Was it arrogance and humility? That's a good example because I feel like you, even if you work in a normal job, whatever it may be, that you can relate to someone who just is the most arrogant and doesn't listen, or maybe you feel like they don't care. Maybe you feel like they don't listen, and now argue that we've all probably experienced that at least once. Um, and then when you're a leader, I remember. I remember when I got one of my first promotions in work, and when I had a job back in college, and as soon as I got that promotion, it's like, oh yeah, and I remember kicking back mentally. That's what it was. I was kicking back mentally, like, oh, like I'm a leader now. Like now you guys go do this. One of the hard things that this is not this type of example, but one of the hard things is when you have your guys and your girls, you have your team, you have your crew, and then you get the promotion. Because I remember experiencing this, like I said, when I was in college, and now having to you're in charge because you're being held accountable for the team's actions. And I didn't have that. I mean, there wasn't that many people. Like I didn't have like a big team, but I still had the responsibility and the accountability. But I remember mentally relaxing. I was like, oh yeah, like okay, now that I'm here, and even though I was like here to here, like the slide is different. Not knowing then what I know now, but it's just a good example that I can give you about myself, because it was a moment where it's like, yeah, okay, cool, I got promoted. I don't need to do that thing anymore. I did make up for it in other ways, but it wasn't intentional. It wasn't like, oh, okay. It's just by chance because there's still some things that I needed to do that were this. It was like the promotion happened, so I had this title, but there were still some factors in the work output that I needed to do myself. So that's where like there was like a thing. But the fact that I got promoted and I now had store keys and I had also this title, definitely was not the best. And there's this man, and there's this so one of my assistant managers at that time. I'm sure I've talked about him before, but the fact is that I want to bring is like he was ahead of his time for me because I was younger. I was, I had a little bit less cares in the world. I was, and I just got promoted. I was probably the youngest person like in a low level management position. I didn't move to like middle management until like maybe a year and a half or maybe 2 years later. Probably about a year and a half later, but because I gave a lot of, so I worked hard to get it, but once I got it, it was like, okay, cool. I don't need to do Z anymore. I can cross that one off. I can make someone else do that because they're lower than me, so I can tell them to do it and it'd be fine. And I was never outrightly like loud, or I wouldn't yell, but I feel like there was some level of demand there, and so then they were some of them had become my friends because we had been working together for a little while, and there was just this it was a roller coaster on its own. Now that I'm talking about it a lot, like man, it really was, because I didn't know what I know now, like I said, but having responsibility it's good to have. It's very, in my opinion, it's good to have because that's how you're gonna take ownership, and but you have to be allowed to plan your things and given the ownership to like, hey man, hey, go, you see that? Let's just say there's a bunch of boxes. Hey, go figure out how to put those boxes in order from eight in an alphabetical order. Okay, cool. And then let's say they come and hey, show me your plan before you do it, so like we can make sure we got squared away, and then go do it. My approach was definitely not that, and the way, kind of the way I handle myself now. And now I'm not in a leadership position at all right now, which is fine. But when I talk to my seniors, as far as I'm talking about like level, I've been very lucky to have some good ones where they listen, and but it's also we talk about it, because also my age has a lot to do. Not my age, not the number, but because of my retail experience, because of what I've been able to do so far, it's like, okay, I learned this, and I was the opposite before, and looking back, it's like, would I do it differently? Oh, obviously, it's freaking almost 10 years ago. It's like, I mean, definitely almost do it, maybe not completely different. My approach and my ability to communicate, it's totally different. I mean, just is 100% different. 100%. I don't want to say 100%, but it's different. It's just different now. The people I've met, the people I've learned from, reading stuff like this and reading accounts like that too, where you have that person that it's his way or the highway. It's like, man, like now I think, and I'll say this out loud, it's like, man, you have some nerve to think you know everything. And I try to have the nerve to realize I don't know everything, even I have a sticker on my water one of my water bottles where it's like, it's Socrates, and it says, I'm paraphrasing, but the only thing I know is that I know nothing. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I've told people that, and I've had people, family members, mention like, oh, that's so true, and it's like, and it's just a matter of fact. I'm not trying to be right. It's just things that I've learned, things I try to remember whenever I am in an emotional state, or when I am trying to figure out this problem with my team, or I get given this task to execute. Then I try to use these things and these, I think about these stories and why all this, then the meta of like everything's connected, because you don't always know where this is gonna. You have an idea of where you want it to lead, but you don't always, and maybe the majority of the time, like it does go where the plan sets out. But then you have those obstructions, you have those obstacles that you have to get over, and it's like, okay, cool, okay, and then you figure it out, and then okay, you go on and you execute, and you guys succeed as a team. But yeah, and again, just to reiterate, it's like sometimes when you have a bad leader. Like in this case, it's given the perspective, because it's only one point of view, but given the perspective of this guy coming from another job into the SEAL teams, and then saying it, or it's seeming like it's his way or the highway, with the exception of the fact that they almost fought. So like I think that's like the turn. That's the straw that broke the camel's back, is like when you try to basically you're assaulting somebody, but. For the empathetic, to bring back empathy, and I know I said this already, but where sometimes that person that's in the leadership position, that's willing to listen, and like, hey, I'm learning too, and maybe and again, we're not perfect, so I'm not saying let's say like there's like a medium point between like this full arrogant type of person to someone that sometimes they're approachable, so being half approachable, half unapproachable, and what I get is like, sometimes they don't mean to be bad. Their intention isn't to be bad, but sometimes they don't have the experience. So, they don't have the experience in this certain category or whatever. It could be healthcare, it could be banking, it could be music, whatever it is. They just don't know better. And so the hope is that if you're under and you're working way up the chain of command, the hope is that, hey, sir, ma'am, chief, senior chief, whoever, boss, I've had this experience in this thing. When I was what's another bad, I'm trying to think of a bad example. When I was doing task A before, I made this mistake. And I noticed that you didn't make that as part of the plan. So, I just want to let you know what I've experienced so far. And then you go and hopefully is that they'll, excuse me, hopefully they'll take that in and be like, oh, hey, that's a good point. I actually didn't even know about that because I haven't done this before. I know I'm in a leadership position, but I haven't done this before. So thanks for your input. I'll make sure to write it down and we'll fix it. Hopefully this will help. Or hey, what else do you know? Again, I haven't done this before, so what is your experience in this? And you take and the thing is, you take things. Sometimes you take things with a grain of salt, but you take them. You take them with a grain of salt. But you take them, and then you just leave it in your little bank. You leave it in your little thought bank, your journal bank, whatever it is. I always carry a journal where pretty much wherever I'm at, especially when it comes to work, because you never know what new things going to come up, what new details, what new things you're going to learn. So that's just my preference now. But yeah, I feel like the majority of us don't mean bad, even when we get put in a leadership position. I never meant bad when I was younger and had that first promotion, but I just kind of took it around like, oh, well, I'm not the boss now. I know I'm not the boss, but hey, I moved up. I moved up, so I don't. Yeah, I can do less than what I have to, or I can do less than what I did before. And Delta Charlie here, which I wish I knew who it was, just so I can do more. Because for me, it's just so I can do more research and I can have this. But I don't know if I mentioned on here, but I talk about taking out the trash, and it's a super simple thing. Take out the trash, and it's not a status thing. It's a, hey, we're gonna clean up. We have a team. We have a group. We're all doing our part to support the group, and part of that in this case was taking out the trash. And that's my example that I've used when I talk to others about certain things, like, hey, none of us are above taking out the trash. None of us are taking out. And I heard it. So reading, I remember when I read that, but Jocko had already talked about it on a podcast, and that's where I heard it. I'm like, oh, and it turned on the light for me. It really turned on the light for me, and I was like, okay. So so the metaphor of taking out the trash. There's other things that you can do. Just talking about clean. So there's cleaning in general. But then, there's also, you can reel it back. Besides cleaning shop is like also I'm not above being able to help, or not above trying to help. And if you can't try to help, you can find the answer, find someone, or if you know someone who has the answer, hey, yeah, I'll connect you with that person because they actually have a way more experience and way better answer than I could ever give you. But I know them. We're good coworkers, or we're good friends, or whatever. We're friends from the past, or we're coworkers from the past, but we've kept in contact. So yeah, absolutely. I'll help you get in contact so you can get your answer, so you can get the answers that you're looking for. I try to use that, and then move on to the next little fire that you need to put out. Okay, I think I'm good there. For now, I've definitely mentioned a lot these past 2 episodes. The last one went technically a little longer than I normally. It's not that long. It's not that I went longer than I want to. It's like, okay, I had to, I needed those extra 2 minutes, 3 minutes to close out properly, and that's just where the book led us, and then led me, and then to put her out the show, this episode. So I am good now. Remember, we're not above taking out the trash, so we'll go from there. Remember, take care of yourself mentally and physically. Take care of your teams. Take care of your household. Lead from the front. If you'd like to support this podcast, please go to I'll have to write it down so I can just mention it now, but it's etsy.com/shop/moving with life, and then you'll see this, and you'll see stickers. I have a sticker here somewhere. I had it in my book. And thanks for listening. I that's one of the humbling things that when I do look at the notes and whatnot, or the stats and whatnot, I check them out, maybe once a week, just to see who's listening, and I see the numbers, and I'm appreciative. I hope that we get something from this, and then we can go use it in our everyday lives. So until next time, we'll see y'all very, very soon.